Shenoy on her new book, and we're talking about what's the big secret. I know I already got you guys curious. What's the big secret? When we talk about women, I think everything is a secret, but one of the topics that definitely comes up is we're talking about menstruation, we're talking about periods. And I think her book is all about removing the stigma that's really attached to this period conversation, and especially when it comes to boys. And this tool is, and I call it a tool because it's not even just a book, is something that parents can use to really start the conversation on periods with their boys, and I think even with their girls. Sonali, and I think a lot of you know her, you've probably read her. She's a journalist, she works for the New Indian Express. Her first book was The Dog Who Taught Me Math, and that was her first children's book. She's currently raising two money plants, so I'm presuming she doesn't have kids. So I'm going to get into that, and they're named Oprah and Ellen. Fascinating, diametrically opposed. So first of all, Sonali, a very, very warm welcome to Sipping Thoughts. So excited to have you here as Superwoman.
Yes, I'm a big fan of these t-shirts. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
So first of all, a big congratulations on your book. It's been very well received. I've seen a lot of reviews in a lot of different national leading dailies.
Yes, it's been doing really, really well. And there's been a lot of curiosity around how it's a book around periods, but the protagonist is a boy. And I think that's what really gets people to like excited and a little bit hooked as to why. Yeah.
I know. And you know what is fascinating? It's 2021. I mean, we're almost halfway through the year, but we still consider periods such a taboo topic. And we use the word in a hush hush tone. There's a lot of discomfort, even in my house. I mean, none of the women want to talk about that they're going through a period. So tell us about that.
Um, I mean, I'm no psychologist, but I think that if something's a taboo, it means that it's passed down. It's not specifically about the time. Like you might read about it, you might see a documentary about it or a YouTube short film about it. But in our homes and in our workspaces, um, people, yeah, definitely go in hush hush tones. And I think it's just been passed down, and that's sort of how things were done, and that's what we continue to do. If it was demonstrated to us at home that a certain language or a certain tone was used in the living room, then we'd sort of just continue that forward. And that's why it's so exciting to question the norm and to ask different questions. And I think that's what brings about change in human behavior.
No, but fantastic. I'm so glad. You're a journalist, but you're very adept at interviews. What inspired you to write this book, and why did you choose this topic? Was there something personal, or was there something that you saw as a big need?
Yeah, so I have never actually had a problem around periods or it being an issue or not being talked about growing up. But this story, the story in my book, What's the Big Secret? It actually happened to me in school as a little girl.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think I was about maybe 12, and I was with my classmate Vidya, and one of our classmates, a boy, came up to us during break time, and he came up to us like in a corner, and he said, "Can you tell me what pads are used for?" And we were both like, we looked at each other, and I wanted to tell him, she didn't want to tell him, and then we said, "Why? Like, where did this come from? Why do you want to know?" So he told us that his sister was now using them, and he had asked her. His sister was 2 years older, so he had asked her, and then she had refused to tell him, and then he had asked his mother. She'd refused to tell him, and that had brought him to us. And he was like this really like curious, mischievous little boy. So yeah, we didn't know whether to take him seriously, what he was going to do with that information. So we were not in consensus, and we did not tell him. And he came back to school, I think a couple of days later, and he was like, "Didn't tell me, but I have found out." So I was the one who wanted to tell him. So I was like, what did you find out? What did you find out? And he said, so his answer is really funny. And when we were kids, we took it one way, and as an adult, I take it another. So he said, I heard that a pad is something that you put on a girl's underwear because something comes out of her, and then this pad will send it all the way back up.
Okay. So much misinformation. But what is intriguing to me, Sonali, we are talking about such a different age. Like there's a big difference in my age, your age, and now even the current generation. But we're seeing this taboo is actually continuing. And something that really frightens me because, you would have think that we would have progressed so much, even from my generation to yours and to the current one.
Yeah. So I think what happens, change happens when we're taught differently, as children in our homes, or when there is a real need for it. Like the pandemic has created a real need for people to connect, and hence here we are talking on Zoom. And even if it were one of us was sort of uncomfortable and not tech inclined, we're still going to do it because it is a need and it is affecting all of us. And I think this hasn't again, like the conversations are happening, right? You will talk to your girlfriend and say, hey, do you have an extra sanitary napkin because I've run out, or I'm not carrying mine. That'll happen in a corner of the room. She'll give it to you. You're probably going to put a book over it, carry it to the bathroom. Like that's how the conversations are happening.
Hide it.
Yeah, but the conversations are happening as they did 10 years ago. And I think that's because this is sort of part of your daily life. Like it's not like a separate part. It's happening while you're going to work, while you're studying, while you're going through your various life phases. And no one's like hurt specifically, like visually, no one is bawling about it. So there's no need, there's no urgency unless somebody is affected and makes a big hue and cry about it. Yeah, I think perhaps that is why it is exactly, the change is so slow.
I really liked the way, because we usually talk a lot about how to talk to girls. And it's really great that you took this topic from a young boy's perspective. And it was great that you explained it to us, that why and how the story was so personal to you. But now I want to ask you this question, because Aditya in your book is 11 years old. Do you feel that that is the right age? And what is the right way to talk to now boys about this topic? Or should we be talking to them even early?
What was the end of your question? I didn't catch it. Or
should we be talking to them even earlier than 11?
I think the right age is when your child gives you the cue that they're curious and they'd like to know. Or, because we live in echo chambers, perhaps it is when they seem to be uncomfortable. And that's likely because, the parent has shown discomfort in some way. And you see that there's there's a slow wall that's building, and that there is something there that needs to be dealt with. But I think the right age is really when the child is ready. Again, I'm not a psychologist, and I think that to really know exactly when the right time is, even specifically for your child, you want to talk to an expert. But I found that, especially when you're little, like you're so curious, you look at the world with wonder, and then you respond based on your caregivers, your teachers, your friends. And if it's encouraged, then you ask the next question. And if it isn't, then you keep silent and you sort of slip it under the rug.
Any tips for girls for taking the conversation forward? Because like you said, you were asked by a boy about this question. And I think a lot of girls also in the age of 12, 13 are very uncomfortable maybe talking about this.
I mean, are you asking for a tip in terms of like when you have discomfort and you want to know more?
No, typically when a boy comes up to you, how should you deal with it? How do you deal with it when you know that, okay, you are in a class? And should you be very forthright and say, yeah, I'm having my periods, I'm chumming? I mean, are we actually hoping to move to that level of openness?
In today's environment, I mean, a lot has changed in schools. I'm talking about a long time ago. I don't know that we're 100% ready, because when you speak openly about your about your body and your needs. One person might be extremely forthcoming, and the other person might say something that could feel like a slight or disrespectful without really realizing it, and it could affect you in a big way as a child. So I don't know that at 12 and 13 we're all ready to be, because I don't know if we can take on the response, if we're ready for every kind of response. But to your question about how should we have conversations, I think, again, take the cue from your personality. Like with what happened to me, I was a big question asker in school. I was the kind of person who people would come to during class while the class was going on and say, like, Sonali, just ask some more questions and then the class will get over. But my questions were not in order to waste time. I was a very curious little girl, and that's what makes me a good journalist, is that I ask good questions, and so many. Whereas the friend that I was with came from a more cautious approach, and she was like, no, he's not taking this seriously. What is he going to do with this information? And her approach was more, if the information is going to be received, of course, we're not all articulating it to this extent as children, but her information was cautious and apprehensive. That was her approach. So I think that you deal with all of these conversations as is your personality and as is your lens of the world.
Please do show us the book, because I think what's very interesting is that you've mindfully avoided using the color red, and which is typically.
We had a conversation about that. Yes, that was actually part of the brief. So this is the book. So you can see it the right way, right? Okay, fine, because I'm seeing it ulta. Yeah, so this is my favorite part, is the plane, which is also a pad. And yeah, that was my idea. I'm so proud of it, although I wouldn't have been able to draw it as beautifully. And do I show you some of the pages?
It's very beautifully illustrated.
Yes, it is beautifully illustrated. Yeah. Here's a really, I think the light is sort of reflecting, but here's a fun scene where Aditya is in the class with his friends, and he's asking everybody what a pad is. And one of his friends has actually taken a pad from his sister's room and brought it in his bag, and they're having like a touch and feel experience there. They're all curious. It was quite a journey bringing this together. But through the book, there's no red. We decided very consciously that there is no red at all. And that was one of the biggest challenges for the illustrator, Anushka, to sort of think out of the box and figure how to go about this. We decided not to use any red because we didn't want it to be off-putting in any sense. And so there's a lot of metaphors used, and there's a lot of humor that's used by way of fun and suggestion. Yeah, but nothing icky that could put you off at that age.
What did you want to achieve by writing this book?
Well, for me, selfishly, as a writer, I am always drawn to novel perspectives. And so for me, that was number one above anything else. Like, I was so excited that I remember this story. I remember asking Arpita, who's my editor at Penguin, what they were looking for specifically. And they were looking at things around change, social change, issues that are being not dealt with. And I was thinking to myself, like, you're not like a big activist. What is it that you want to write about? What's a story that you want to tell? And I was reading stories about, dark skin, fair skin, curly hair. And I've not been discriminated against. Like, I love my body. I've never been body shamed. So I was like, what do I write about that is going to touch kids, but that's also a story that I'm excited about. And I remember this, I think at like 3 a.m. when I was unable to sleep one night. I remember this story from my childhood, and it began there. And then I took it to my editor and I was like, so what do you think? This happened to me, the protagonist could be a boy, and then we could have all of these situations where he's asking adults questions, and it's extremely awkward, but extremely funny for the reader. What do you think? And that's how it evolved. Yeah, but then toward the end, when we were almost ready to print, I was thinking, I have to tell this boy who inspired the story. How do I do this? Because he's not exactly a friend anymore. I haven't talked to him in like 20 years. He's a pilot, and it's come full circle because he's just adopted a baby girl. So he's going to be having the conversation now. And so I messaged him on Instagram, and I was like, I have something to tell you. And I told him about this incident, and he took a while and he remembered it. It's also very interesting how when I was a child and he wanted to know what pads were, I was just excited to be a part of that curious energy and tell him the answer. And then we had a big laugh when he told us that it sends stuff all the way back up. But as an adult, I think of it as, gosh, wait, how long did he believe that?
Yeah.
So yeah, it has made me think about all of these experiences through different lenses because so much time has passed.
Now, what are the difficulties? I know you're a journalist, you write for adults, but what were the difficulties in writing a book for children, especially in getting that humor right? Because that's very tough to do.
Well, for me, it isn't. Funs, wordplay, that is my jam. Like, I make games to keep life interesting constantly. It isn't just to write. So that was one of my favorite parts, to just get a kick out of little bits of humor here and there. There's a part in the book where, so through the book, he's asking various adults. He's asking like his mom, his dad, his teacher. So he ends up asking the pizza guy. And did you read this section? So he asked the pizza guy, do you know what periods are? And in the same breath, he's like, also, do you have extra sauce packets? So it was really fun to come up with these little bits that a child might not get the first time they read it if they're not oriented toward what menstruation is, but they'll get it the next time. And the adult,
I really liked it because he just took it as a question, as a question, just like a child would. And when you're curious, you're asking everybody that you think could possibly provide you with the answer. But now tell us, a lot of people want to write children's book and they look deceptively simple. Any tips for people that want to write?
Tips for people who want to write. I mean, first up, you want to really simplify it. Keep it really not overly embellished, because you want it to be understood. And for me, the biggest challenge was the part where he does get his answer eventually. Like, he's so done with asking everybody. He's just fed up and he's sad and he feels like nobody wants to tell him. And then his sister does eventually tell him. And that was very delicate, because you can't reveal too much, because you could taint the experience for when you actually are ready at a later date, for instance. In any case, you want to reveal what is appropriate for the child. But you don't want to reveal too little, because then you don't satiate curiosity. But you don't want it to be a biology textbook, and you don't want to be overly graphic. And so, just that balance, that is tricky. That was a big challenge. That was a challenge as a writer. That was a challenge for the illustrator, and the whole process. That was a big challenge.
And you left it open, because at the ending, it's like we're waiting for the sequel, because what's a tampon? What are you working on next? We always love to know. I mean, so is it this genre? It's in children's books that you found that where your heart lies?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to be writing a lot more children's books. And I've got a couple of ideas brewing. We'll let you know when it's down and done.
And we love to know what you're reading. What do you read? And who do you love to read?
I have recently gotten on the Audible train. The last book that I read was Untamed by Glennon Melton Doyle, which was amazing. It's really empowering. And right now, I've just gotten a new one called The Graveyard Book, which is actually a children's book. which I've had a peek of, but I'm very excited to get into. It's about a baby. It's about a killer who went to a house and has this need to what's the word that I'm looking for when you have to finish what you start? Like this compulsive,
Yeah.
like when you need to knock on a door 3 times. Anyway, so this murderer has this personality.
Reminds me of Big Bang Theory.
Exactly. So he's murdered, and it's a children's book. So he's murdered everyone in the house, but the baby likes to crawl all the time and has crawled all the way out of the house and has landed up in a graveyard. And the killer goes there but can't find the baby. The baby is now being taken care of by different caretakers at the graveyard, including ghosts. So I'm so excited. I have a very, very curious mind with lots of eclectic filters, and different things entice me. I also binge on a lot of YouTube and a lot of self-help, a lot of relationship stuff, a lot of the whole minimalism trend. Yeah.
No,
But
I really, loved it because, I have 2 5-year-old girls and all these difficult conversations, I'm always thinking about ways, and I found that books become a great way to actually start talking to them. And I know this is, of course, for a little bit older kids, but it's great that you've kind of put it down because it makes it so much easier now for a parent to actually go through the story with them, see the type of questions that emerge, and, kind of take it forward from there. Because as parents, we're usually struggling with what are the right words. And I think you've laid it out so beautifully that it makes it easy for us. So thank you for that.
It's one of the biggest things I realized when I started doing interviews and started getting feedback was I was like, I'm not a parent, but parents are asking me questions about how to start that conversation. And I'm actually really I can't wait to be a parent when that happens and the time is right. But I heard some really unique stories that I wouldn't have been able to even conceive. Like this one parent who has, I think, an 8-year-old and 11-year-old had already begun talking. And one is a boy, one is a girl. And she already begun talking about periods. And she acknowledged me for writing this book. And I said, but what led to this? Because most people need for it to either come from the child or, it's brought up in school or there's something that leads to it. And she told me this story that really touched me. She said that when she was a little girl of about 11, her grandfather had been suffering from cancer for a while, and he passed away, and everybody was sad. And one of the things that she remembered very clearly was that there was a lot of blood. After he died, she got her period. So she thought she had cancer. And she didn't want to tell anybody because she would rather die than have them be sad and knowing. And that was the link for her as a child in her mind. And so for the longest time, it was so traumatic for her. And nobody knew that she had her period. And of course, that's an exception. It's not everyone's experience. But it goes to show how it's so important for us to feel welcomed into conversation as opposed to feel fearful, anxious, worried about being judged in little minds. Not even all of that is just massively compounded when you grow up and you have insecurities. But that was a big one for me.
No, definitely. And I think you've brought it up very sensitively, and especially for boys, because we usually, like I said, mindset wise, think about how to have this conversation with our daughters. And you're also raising the thing that, no, we also need to have this conversation, even with our sons, even if they do not have sisters, but just in general, that this conversation is very, very important for both sexes so that we are more sensitive to each other. Any closing thoughts that you have?
Yes, two actually. What I'm most excited about with this book is when conversations are had around periods, what it's going to lead to for, the little boys now who read the book, who are going to grow up and maybe 20 years later, what their approach is going to look like. And I can't even imagine, because it's not been a conscious conversation. I know that there are lots of girls with brothers, and it's likely that those boys, would have bought a pad, would know a little bit more. But it's not been a conscious effort to have this conversation and streamline it. So I wonder what that generation of men will be like, and how it will affect them as leaders and as friends and as spouses. I think it's going to create like a more inclusive world, and I think it'll definitely lead to relationships where there's more. So I'll tell you like a fun story. I had so now this is a grown up example. So I had this boyfriend, and on one, I don't remember how it came up, but I was making a reference to pads, and he immediately like put his fingers in his ears and he went la 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 la. I was like, what? Why? What happened? And it was funny at the time. It was really funny, and I thought it was like a fun game. So I just said 8 different words around periods, and he was so uncomfortable, and I was just having a good time. But what it made me realize over time was that that approach of not wanting to know, it applied to everything else as well. It applied to difficult conversations. It applied to conflict, and that approach it applied to life. It was like a lens. And it was very much, well, I'll take care of my business and you take care of yours. And that isn't good. That isn't good for us as a community, and it isn't good for relationships. It isn't good for friendships or sibling relationships or parent-child. And it is a very distinct approach. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, is that when you want to know about somebody, it might start off as being curious. It might start off as just wanting to know what everyone else knows. But when you want to know about somebody and you realize that you'd like them to be okay in some way, it helps everything, and that approach carries forward. So I think that's going to be a big one. I'm very excited for little boys growing up into men who will be able to say, are you feeling okay? Can I bring you some water? As opposed to just,
La, 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 la.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sonali. That was excellent. And I'm really, really excited that you brought this book, much, much needed in today's times. With that, I wish you a good night.
Thank you. Do I just leave? Do you want to talk a little bit before I go? Are you going to cut it now?